The SEC has been kind of down recently in the eyes of the public, but when you get a double overtime game like you just saw between Texas and Texas A&M, how do you consider that not to be a blessing for the future of what is this sport? Welcome on into the Overtime Drive. It's Cole Thompson here. No Dave Shumate on this episode because, let's be real, Dave's busy with a bunch of other things. He's going to be on later talking about what goes on between Mississippi State, Missouri, and what goes on tonight in the Kentucky game. But I am here. It is Thursday. We have a mailbag show. I'm still moving into my apartment, my brand new house, so I'm going to be moving around a lot of things. Don't pay attention to what's going on behind me. We still are going to give you a mailbag. It's going to be a quicker show, not a full-time hour tonight, but we are going to still talk about some of the questions that you want answered as we do every single Thursday. So real quickly, make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification, and of course, subscribe to the channel because we talk college football every single day. We talk SEC sports every single day. Download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. Follow us on the socials, link in the description. Follow me at Mr. Cole Thompson. And as always, check out our great work found at secunfiltered.com. And this show is naturally brought to you by our friends over at FANDUEL. Visit FANDUEL.com/SECU to join today and get started with $150 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. So let's just say you threw down $5 with the +6 for Texas. You just won $150 in bonus bets. Sign up and join the madness today at FANDUEL.com/SECU. It's a quick episode. I don't have time to really go through everything around the SEC. That's more of a Dave thing that he wants to do. So we're going to get right into the mailbag. Let's not waste any time. Still got about 7 questions. If you have a question, go ahead and throw it in the chat and I will gladly answer it for you. First one up, Jason W. says, is it time to be nervous about DJ Lagway's limitations in practice? It feels like all the offseason hype is going to be out the window with him missing time. So for those of you that have been living under a rock, DJ Lagway is going to be very limited throughout spring practice. Billy Napier came out and said that he's dealing with a lower body injury. They're going to have him on a bit of a rep count. And that is going to, I think, derail what a lot of people believe about this Florida team. Finished the year off strong. Wins against Ole Miss. Wins against LSU. Dominant fashion in a very underwhelming performance from DJ Lagway, but everyone else stepped on up against Tulane in the Gasparilla Bowl to finish 8-5. They bought into Billy Napier for another season. They believe that he is the long-term guy. But now your starting quarterback is out, and people are saying, well, what happens if he's not the same? What happens if he's underwhelming throughout the regular season? And then we're back to square one. We fire Billy, and it just was a wash of a season. Well, let's start off with the fact that it's, again, a team sport. I know what DJ Lagway can do. I've watched him with my own 2 eyes down in Willis, Texas. It's only about 20 minutes away from where I live, and the kid has all the intangibles. You want to see him build that rapport in the relationship with some of the younger receivers, Vernell Brown, Dallas Wilson, but he can do that on a sample size with very limited reps. He can do that by having that rapport away from the actual practice field, and that's something that you want to build upon. What I want to know is what the rest of Florida looks like. They have 4 returning starters on the offensive line that seem to find its niche at the very end of the season. They have 2 wide receivers that I am very high on in Trey Wilson and J. Michael Sturdivant. They also have Adam Mizell, who I think is going to be that vertical threat, even in a limited sample size. And if you talk to anybody out in Gainesville, I got some intel today, both Dallas Wilson and Vernell Brown, the former 5-star that flipped at the very last minute with the 11th hour and 59 seconds to Florida from Oregon, they're turning heads. They don't look like 18-year-olds that just arrived on campus. They feel like players that are not only going to be very, very dominant, but have a significant role in this offense underneath Billy Napier in 2025. So how do they continue to progress? Now, again, you want to see that relationship form with, again, number 2, but are they caught up to speed with the style of offense that Billy wants to run next year? Because you got some early tests ahead. You got the Miami game. You got to go play against Ole Miss on the road. How are you going to respond in that moment? And if they start off hot, we're talking about potentially a Florida team that on paper, even if they go 8-4, that's a team that where you are confident in 2026, new schedule, much more, I think, balanced formation, and another year with DJ Lagway under the helm, they're going to be fine. They're going to be a team that we actually say, hey, they probably should belong in that college football playoff run. Not one of those teams that we think should be on the outside looking in, but actually one that is a very foregone conclusion that 8-4 with that schedule and a couple of upset wins, they feel really good. I'm not worried about DJ Lagway. What I'm worried about is who takes that next step forward. You got a great run game. You got a bunch of freshmen that are going to have experience under their belt because you had to force feed them to play last year. You got some young up-and-comers on the defensive side. So I truly think that when you look at Florida, the things that I'm wondering about have nothing to do with DJ Lagway whatsoever, who, yes, did have his ups and downs last year, and certainly you want to see more progression from. But I wonder more about the rest of the team. What does this defense look like? What does this secondary look like? How much are we seeing progress for Ron Roberts' unit going into year 2 of the system? And are they all caught up to speed so when fall camp rolls around, they're all on the same page? Question number 2 comes in from Taylor Boston. Who are some underrated wide receivers you're excited to see in the SEC this upcoming season? I think Courtney Crutchfield, back in his home state, could be the best player nobody is talking about. Well, I don't think that at all. I don't think that Courtney Crutchfield is one of those players. However, I do think that you have a name in Arkansas's offense. That's Omega Blake. For those of you that don't know, last season, when playing out in Charlotte, North Carolina, he averaged 24.8 yards per play. That led all FBS players with at least 600 receiving yards, finished with nearly 800 yards, 9 touchdowns for a very underwhelming offense. But when I look at this team, more specifically when I look at Taylon Green, what's his best attribute? He can uncork one. 50 yards down the field without missing a beat, right in the breadbasket. And what do you got in Omega Blake? A dude that is a vertical force, a vertical threat, a burner that is going to be on the opposing end and probably hauling in a pass for 6 points. I think it's a match made in heaven. That's one that I'm absolutely looking forward to. Another one, how about Giovanni Gibson? Sophomore from Appaloosa, Louisiana. Last season played at Arkansas Pine Bluff. And a lot of you are going to say, well, Cole, why should we be excited about a kid that played for Arkansas Pine Bluff? I'll tell you why, because he had 7 100 receiving yard games, 9 touchdowns, 17.4 yards a play, 1,200 receiving yards, and he's going to an offense in Oklahoma that is known for being a vertical passing attack. Giovanni Gibson may end up being as good as Deion Burks, if not better than him. There's already the highlight play that's going around Twitter right now with him and John Mateer connecting. And if I get that relationship and that rapport in an offense that was anemic last year, how are you not excited if you are a Sooner fan? That's a guy that you can be talking about maybe 2 or 3 years from now as he's getting drafted in the first round saying, we picked him up before anybody else noticed him. And now that he's in Norman, Jim Nagy's on campus, the dude who has understood how to find these diamond in the roughs and bring them down to Mobile to be on the front and center stage for all of the NFL to see. How does that not excite you? How does that not intimidate you? He's one that I'm absolutely locked in. DeAndre Moore's another one. Now we got Texas losing 3 of its best playmakers. You're no longer going to have a Ryan. You're no longer going to have a Matthew Golden. Isaiah Bond is off to the NFL. You're losing a Silas Bolden. You're losing a Gunnar Helm. So somebody's got to be that number 1 X factor for Arch Manning. People want to talk about Arch as the big-time savior, the next big thing in Austin. Well, every big quarterback has to have a good supporting cast. DeAndre Moore was really solid last year. 7 touchdowns, 11.7 yards per catch, had a couple of 100-yard games, nearly had the play of the day in the Florida matchup, but just dropped at the very last second. What if he takes that next step forward? What if he ends up in the slot turning into what we thought Isaiah Bond was going to be? Vertical playmaker that would take the tops off of defenses and be a security blanket for his young quarterback. What if we see that version from him? He's already got the chops. People talk about him as being one of the more pristine route runners, one of the more high-profile playmakers. I think that with a full offseason working with Arch Manning, knowing that, hey, I got Ryan Wingo on one side. I got some young guys like Lockett coming on in. I got to be that dude from the early get-go. I'm cool with that. I'll be able to take that next jump. He may end up having one of the best seasons that nobody's talking about. I think J. Michael Sturdivant's another one that we got to be talking a little bit more about. If you've heard anything coming out of Florida camp, and you probably should be reading the message boards right now, Billy Napier said that J. Michael Sturdivant kind of clocked in at 23.5 miles per hour at practice. I don't know if you know, but that's pretty fast. That is, in fact, one of the fastest players in the country right now. And the way that we saw the offense work last year, that was the role for Elijah Badger and Shamir Dike. One of them was going to be playing underneath, and the other one was going long. If he can end up being that dude, after not really impressing during his tenure when he was at UCLA, but that really wasn't his fault, inconsistent quarterback play, change of the style of offense, last season only finished with 315 yards, I think that he could be exactly like Matthew Golden. Now, not the same player as Matthew Golden. I want to preface that before we go any further. What I'm saying is that I believe, much like Matthew Golden, flying under the radar throughout spring, going into fall camp, expected to be the number 2, maybe the number 3 receiver, be effective when it comes to special teams. No, he ends up having a phenomenal season, and the big reason why you see that next step forward from DJ Lagway. Yeah, I really like what you have in Trey Wilson. I like what you have in some of the younger guys, but you tell me at the end of the day that J. Michael Sturdivant is one of those dudes that we're talking about garnering a lot more interest from the NFL, proving from being a Monday play, from a day 3 player to maybe even a round 2, God forbid, a round 1 player. I won't be shocked. 4-star wide receiver, Donovan Uglebole. I know I said that. I know I butchered the name completely. So I apologize for that. It's, let me phrase that. Stop, breathe. Donovan Ulangbode for Missouri is one that I'm very excited to see. You don't know what you have at wide receiver. Yeah, you have Kevin Coleman. I think that's a really good start for yourself. But outside of him, who's really your number 2? Is it going to be a Marquise Johnson taking that next step forward? Is it going to be potentially a Joshua Manning? Brett Norfleet in the slot? Does he end up having a big-time year? You got a 5-star wide receiver from IMG Academy, early enrollee, learning the ins and outs of Kirby Moore's system. And what do we know about Kirby Moore? Well, he likes throwing to 2 receivers. Last season, it was Luther Burden and Theo Weiss, Batman and Robin, complementary pieces that worked exceedingly well together. Who's to say that he can't be that dude from the get-go? He's already got Kevin Coleman to learn from inside the slot. I think Coleman's going to be one of those dudes that really does wonders for taking the tops off of defenses. And because he can be a gadget player, you can utilize him in the run game. You're going to have to prepare for him, which means if double coverage comes to number 3's way, guess what? Donovan O is going to be wide open down the field for 6 points, and that could easily happen. Dejon Stribling is another one. Last season, nobody talked about him because why? Well, he played for Oklahoma State. It was a down season for Oklahoma State. Terrible quarterback play, inconsistent in the run game with Ollie Gordon. Despite having a veteran offensive line, they never felt like that they were consistent. Bad defense, but Stribling was really, really good. Over 800 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns, finished with 55 catches, 17 yards of play. And now he's going to Oxford, Mississippi. What do we know about Lane Kiffin and wide receivers? Well, they end up hitting down in Oxford when they come in from the transfer portal. Don't believe me? Well, Trey Harris was a no-namer that nobody really thought of or considered to be anything. And then he sets a franchise program record week 1 against FCS Mercer. Now he's being talked about as a top 60 pick in this year's NFL draft. Stribling can follow that exact same pathway. Don't believe me? Absolutely think that he is one of those dudes that you have to be talking a lot about. So those are some names I really do like. I think that those are the ones that I'm probably banking on to have a little bit more success. There could be some other names definitely that belong in that chat, but certainly those are the ones that if you tell me at the end of the day, they end up hitting, not going to be shocked whatsoever. Next up, let's talk about Thunderman writes in. I know it's early to buy to the John Mateer hype at Oklahoma, but should we be cautiously optimistic? It's spring, and I feel confident that even though that one clip of him has gone viral, the Sooners might be back. Okay, rule number 1. It's spring football. You got 15 practice to enjoy yourself. You better embrace what is your team because you can't lose the offseason. You can't. The only way that you lose the offseason is if somebody that is prominent to your team gets injured and you find out that they're done for 2025. That's it. Embrace what you are. Let's talk about this, number 1. This offense for Oklahoma was beyond disgusting from last season. Who is actually going back and remembering what Seth Luttrell and Jackson Arnold and the inability to run the football and the terrible offensive line was doing when you now have this chance to hit reset? You go ahead and you see Brent Venables say, okay, was it good enough from last season? Let's go get younger. Let's go get more aggressive. Let's go get a kid that is being wanted by every school in the country, John Mateer. And better yet, just so we guarantee that we get John Mateer, let's bring in his offensive coordinator who already has proven that he can work with not just him, but Cam Ward. So Ben Arbuckle comes to Norman slowly after the quarterback coach follows him. And then you get John Mateer to say, no thanks, Bill Belichick. No thanks, Notre Dame. No thanks, Miami. I'm going to go ahead and play Memorial Stadium. And then you watch that one throw. The dude's mechanics look phenomenal. The footwork is out of this world. The accuracy of the pass to Giovanni Gibson is second to none. And so now you're seeing him act like, hey, we got some mojo. We got some moxie. Do you know what that reminded me of? There was a guy by the name of Baker Mayfield that came in from Lake Travis, and a lot of people thought that he was going to be a pretty solid quarterback. but he carried himself like, hey, I've already arrived on campus and I know who I am. I know what I was able to do when I was out in Lubbock, Texas. I know what I was able to do when I was out at Lake Travis High School. I'm coming into this program and you're going to know who I am. That's how I feel about John Mateer. And the thing is that that's style quarterback that you need if you want to win an SEC championship. You want to be competitive in the SEC. You want to be a team that actually meets the expectations out in Sooner Country. And you know what? That's the type of quarterback that I'm going to go after every single time. And that's not to say a shot at Jackson Arnold, but you could definitely tell by week 4, kid's confidence was shot. You kind of bunch him, you bring in Michael Hawkins, he ends up not delivering, you bring him back in, you fire his offensive coordinator, he has no time to play behind that offensive line. And so naturally, you're not going to see the best results from him when you don't get him at his full capacity. John Mateer's coming on in, and he's looking poised. He's looking fine. He's looking very confident and a little bit cocky. But you want to know what? When you're out in a place like Norman, Oklahoma, a blue blood school that has expectations to be considered one of the best in college football year in and year out, you better carry yourself with that type of swagger. Kyler Murray had that type of swagger. Guess what? They went to a college football playoff and robbed him winning a Heisman Trophy. Baker Mayfield had that type of swagger, and he brought that and infused it to the rest of the locker room. And they played with confidence, they played with character, and they played with an unrelenting style that absolutely helped them get to a college football playoff and him win a Heisman Trophy. Even a guy like Jalen Hurts, cool, calm, collective, quiet, but a silent assassin, carried himself with that type of moxie. Hey, I was at Alabama. I was at the university with Tua Tagovailoa. I ended up beating him out the first year. I come back in, and I'm the reason why our team goes to the college football playoff. You think that I'm scared of the Big 12? That's the kind of confidence that you're seeing from John Mateer. And that confidence, I think, is going to carry on in for the rest of the offense. From guys like Deion Burks to Giovanni Gibson to Isaiah Satenga, from your tight end play to your offensive line. And just having that kind of poise, that should be something that you hold on to if you are a Sooners fan. Now, I'm not telling you that this is going to be an easy season. I'm not even going to tell you that you can make it to the college football playoff. My expectations for Oklahoma, drastically different than your expectations. I personally believe if you go 8-4 with this schedule, the toughest schedule in college football, week 2 against Michigan, you got to go play in Red River. You got to go welcome in an Ole Miss team that you have no idea what they're going to be. You got to go to South Carolina. You got to play against Missouri early on in the season. You don't know what you're going to get out of LSU late in the year. Like all of those games combined, that could be a recipe for disaster. But if you go 8-4, to me, that's a sign that things are trending in the right direction. Because I still believe that, yes, people are going to say that defense was awful against Giovanni Gibson. Now, guys, it's one play. Honestly, the defense will be fine. I want to see this offense take that next step forward. And as long as I'm getting that, then I got to feel pretty confident. But I believe personally, if you go 8-4 this year, it's because John Mateer is playing out of his mind. And the best part is that everybody else is kind of understanding the assignment. You're watching as the offensive linemen are delivering clean blows. You're watching as the run game that ranked 75th last year is actually finding a way to start building that momentum. You're watching as the defense is playing lights out. They're forcing 3-and-outs and punts instead of giving up points. And most importantly, you're watching as that confidence, that swagger, that thing that we as people who love Oklahoma football and love when Oklahoma football is good is kind of back in action at Memorial Stadium. Yes, naturally, of course, you want to make it to the college football playoff. Yes, naturally, of course, you want to be a team that feels like that this is the right identity for us moving forward and that we are still the team to beat in the SEC and that we're right there alongside Texas. But for my opinion, most importantly, the biggest one of all, I just want to be able to know that I have that confidence back. So, no, don't overreact to what is going on with John Mateer. John Mateer's making those type of passes this early on in camp. That should be a sign that things are actually trending upwards for you and something really positive is coming your way. Next up, Franklin M. asks, you've talked about Jackson Arnold on Sunday Funday, but I'm curious why you believe in him so much. Why should anybody think that he's good after last season? So it's spring football. Overreact to everything. Be embracing what is this sport, because everyone knows that by the time that we get to November, people are going to have their opinions formed and they're going to have the backing. They're going to have the information. They're going to be able to say, this is where he looked really good. This is where he looked really bad. Jackson Arnold was a 5-star quarterback that impressed when he was out in California, won the Elite 11, got an offer to play at Oklahoma, and initially committed to be underneath Jeff Lebby's system. Well, Jeff Lebby gets a job at Mississippi State. They bring in Seth Luttrell. They bring in a couple of other offensive minds, and they say, well, we're going to the SEC. You'll be content. Well, Nick Anderson, one of his go-to receivers in the Alamo Bowl, gets hurt immediately. Deion Burks is out for multiple weeks, and then when he comes back in, he gets right back injured. The offensive line was a turnstile of misery. They couldn't run the football to save their life. They fired Seth Luttrell midway through the year after they had already benched Jackson Arnold against Tennessee because he had nowhere else to go. Arnold comes back in. He realizes that he's kind of playing for an opportunity to either impress another school or win the starting job for 2025. Ends up playing awful at times against Missouri, which ends up leading to that big Zion Young scoop and score and Missouri's 10-win season. And yet now we're saying, well, he goes to Auburn, so it's Hugh Freeze. It's a tough schedule. He's gonna have his faults. He's gonna have his miscaps. He's gonna have his hiccups. Here's my thing. Do you remember when we said that about Bo Nix going to Oregon? Now, I'm not going to preface this by going any further and saying that I am not saying that Bo Nix 2.0 is going to be reincarnated down on the plains of Auburn where people thought he was the greatest quarterback to walk through since Cam Newton arrived. I'm not going to go that far. But imagine if we carried ourselves with that same mentality for every single quarterback that failed and said, you know what? Guy can't end up ever hitting his stride. Do you know how many people would fail in this industry? How many people would fail at college football because we didn't give them a second chance? So many storylines that we talk about. Michael Penix being one of them would never have an opportunity to play for a national title. Jake Coker, who was at Florida State, would never have an opportunity to lead Alabama back to a national title underneath Nick Saban. So many others would never be able to say, I was able to prove the doubters wrong. And so why am I going to doubt Jackson Arnold? There were still some moments of greatness. The ability to be able to run against Alabama's defense in the game of all games, the upset that actually sent the Sooners to a bowl game and kept their streak alive. Yeah, that's one that you hold your hat on and say, well, he's able to move. He's able to be that dual threat quarterback, that guy that we saw make those plays and certainly kind of lived up to the guy that we saw in Declan Geyer. Well, to be in a Hugh Freeze offense, you got to be able to be mobile. You have to trust your legs. You have to be able to feel like that you can move on the ground and keep plays alive. So Jackson Arnold already showed you that. Also, the wide receiver room is going to be filled to the brim. So much so that you will see, I think, 1 or 2 players actually enter the transfer portal at some point in the next several weeks when spring practice is over. But that just shows you how deep it is. Eric Singleton comes on in from Georgia Tech. That's a kid that if you look at right now and tell me that he ends up leading Auburn to a 1,000-yard season, wouldn't be shocked. And the only reason why he wouldn't is because you have Cam Coleman, the 5-star. He's going to have a breakout year. He may end up being the best wide receiver in the SEC far and away. You also have Malcolm Simmons and Perry Thompson. You feel good about the tight end room. You add in some freshmen that are already on campus and they're learning the ins and outs of Hugh Freeze's offense, but they don't have to play like you saw last season. They can wait their turn. So the offense has the weapons that were never on display when Jackson Arnold was in Oklahoma last year. The offensive line is going to be better. Yes, they are replacing 3 starters, but still, they went out into the transfer portal. They got themselves some really solid names. They also have 2 freshmen. Two freshmen right now that will be sophomores next year. So I guess technically they're sophomores. That you feel confident having a full year in the system should be pretty well put together. And on top of that, they also still, I think, are going to have a good run game. Yes, they are losing Jarquez Hunter. That is something that does upset me. That is something that I think should upset Auburn fans because of the way he wasn't utilized properly last season. But you still have Damari Alston. You still brought in the UConn transfer. You still have some young up-and-comers that are part of this team. I like where Auburn is offensively for Jackson Arnold to flourish. Now, again, at this point, I cannot continue to hold out hope. And I'll be real, part of the reason why I believe so much in Jackson Arnold is because I thought he was going to be the breakout player of 2024. I thought he was going to come on into Oklahoma, and there was an opportunity for him to go 8-4. So it was a miss on me. I'll learn from my mistakes. I'm sure I'm going to have a million more later on. But I still think that there is an opportunity for a Jackson Arnold to hit his stride, especially early on in the season. That game against Baylor week 1 out McLean Stadium is one that you want to be attached to. And the reason I say that so confidently is because of when you look at what Baylor has returning offensively with Sawyer Robertson, that's a matchup to where you can easily go ahead and say the quarterback who wins this game might be a reason why their team is at least playing in the month of November for a shot at the college football playoff. I'm not ready to go there for Baylor. I'm not ready to go there for Auburn. What I'm ready to say is that both of those teams have enough confidence to where a win in that game, anything is possible. Anything. So I'm not ready to give up on Jackson Arnold. I haven't even seen him through 15 practices. So let's pump the brakes before we go ahead and doubt what the former 5-star that absolutely wowed people out in California can do when he's on the plains in the right offensive system. One second, let me get a sip. We're going to move rapid firely through these last three, but real quickly, I want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. This bracket season is here, and FanDuel is letting you make the call because right now, new customers can win $200 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. So $200 in bonus bets and bet on everything from clutch shots, the last second heartbreaks, and even who's cutting down the nets you've been waiting to join. There's no better time. There's tournament action almost every single day, and FanDuel has the amazing bet types like spreads, totals, game props, and so much more. If you want to make a bet, make sure that you go ahead and look at that Tennessee-Texas line. I'm telling you, as much as Rick Barnes may feel like that the Volunteers are ready to go on an epic run back to the Sweet 16, Texas is playing with fire right now. You don't want Johnson to get hot because when he does, everything is off the wagon. Visit FanDuel.com/SECU and get started with college hoops action all tournament long. Disclaimer: must be 21 plus and present in select states, 18 plus in DC. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit is required with bonus issue with non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expires 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas and under an agreement in Kansas Star Casino, LLC. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg/chat in Connecticut or visit MD Gambling Help in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelpma.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. One more sip, and then we'll get back to it. Blake writes in, can you talk about LSU's offensive line? 4 new starters are in play, but if they fail, the season could be down the drain. All right, pretty fair point. I look at LSU, their offensive line is the one downside that I think is about the offense right now. You return a quarterback that has thrown for over 4,000 yards. That's a win in my book. I don't care how many interceptions he had last year. When you have a quarterback that's throwing more than he can run, I consider that already a blessing. He's a veteran in a brand new offense he's a veteran with a bunch of new quarterbacks being implemented into their offenses at respected schools. And they're on your schedule. Like LSU playing Ole Miss. Austin Simmons, first-time starter. When you get Arch Manning, if you potentially face off against him in the SEC championship, first-year starter. Whoever is winning the Alabama job, first-year starter. So that's already confident for me. I look at what you have in the running. Caden Durham, I believe, is the best running back that nobody is talking about from last season. Because if there were so many moments where he was an inch away from breaking off and having a dominant run game, having a dominant performance to where we were all talking about him, I think that he's in for a breakout year. The wide receiver room is loaded. And I'm not just talking about with tight ends like Donovan Green and Bauer Sharp. I'm talking about Berrien Brown, who is a burner. Go turn on week 5's tape for Kentucky against Ole Miss and tell me that you do not see a star in the making with Garrett Nussmeier, the Nuss Bus, uncorking one 50 yards down the field. Nick Anderson was a freshman All-American, 10 touchdowns for Oklahoma in 2023. Who's to say that he can't be that guy next season out in Baton Rouge? You still have Aaron Anderson. You have Chris Hilton. The offensive line is the one thing that scares me when it comes to LSU. But here's the other thing that's really important about it. LSU last season wasn't able to run the football. You guys realize that part of the reason when we talk about a team like LSU being a little bit underwhelming last season and that Brian Kelly can't live up to expectations, it's because they couldn't run the ball. Like, people want to talk about Garrett Nussmeier not meeting the standard of what was LSU quarterback play. And naturally, you have 2 quarterbacks that have won Heisman trophies in the last 6 years to where you feel like that the next guy that's waiting in the wings should be better than advertised. And I'll be real, there were moments that he actually absolutely struggled, but wouldn't you struggle too if you did have quality run game and run support? So how do you not have a good run game? Partially, it's due to the play design by Joe Sloan, and partially, it's due to your offensive line. So they bring in Josh Thompson, the Northwestern kid. I think that he is going to have a very stellar year. They have two freshmen that have been learning underneath this offensive system for the last 2 seasons. Now it's time for them to step on up. I think when you look at LSU, you're not going to be able to kind of determine who they are until probably midway through the year. We realized after that game against UCLA, where it just felt like the run game was anemic at best. Yeah, this is who they are as an offense. You're going to have to throw it. You're going to have to throw it a lot. You're going to have to throw it often. And if you can't get the ball working through the air, you're probably going to lose this game. Lo and behold, they did. The Alabama game, perfect example. Couldn't run the football. It was the Garrett Nussmeier show. It led to more mental mistakes. He ended up having a couple of big-time interceptions, and it cost them a win in Death Valley. I think that this is a season where you got to look at the offensive line and say, we're going to put the best 5 out there. Whoever it is. If it's Josh Thompson, we got to play him at center. We got to play him at center. If it's the Virginia Tech transfer, we got to play him at guard. We'll play him at guard. We want the best 5 to protect our quarterback because we cannot waste this season. Brian Kelly knows the pressure is cooking, and he understands that there are politics that go into playing down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which is why when you look at his coaching staff, part of the reason why I'm so high on LSU this year is they have the right names. Does it suck losing a guy like Bo Davis? Absolutely. But Kyle Williams, experience being in LSU, knowing what the standard is underneath Nick Saban, knowing how they have tapped into the resources that is in the boot, that is in that state, yeah, they should never lose again. At least when it comes to on the recruiting trail, when it comes to what the identity is, people know what the standard is supposed to be at Tiger Stadium on a Saturday night. It is the most ravenous, toxic, hostile atmosphere in all of college football, which is why Tiger Stadium, in my opinion, is the number 1 location in the sport to go catch a game. And I'm all for it because they've earned that right. If the offensive line can just be stable, can make sure that Garrett Nussmeier gets a second opportunity to meet up with Aaron Anderson or a Nick Anderson on the outside or a Chris Hilton for that matter. And then they give you at least 100 rushing yards on the ground between 3 or 4 running backs. I think it's a pretty good job. But there were problems last year with the offensive line that people don't want to admit. Yes, you had one of the best left tackles in the game in Will Campbell. Yes, you had stability in Emory Jones and Dellinger and Frazier, but they weren't perfect. We can admit that. There were some faults to this team. I like where they are right now. It's a chance to hit reset. If the reset is promising, then I think that everything else that falls in line should be promising as well. Ace Boogie, what's up? He wants to ask, what are your thoughts on the Gamecocks this year? To be completely honest, they're a wild card team once again, but here's what I will say. I am higher than most on what this Gamecock team can be. I am very high on Lenore Sellers having an opportunity to win the Heisman Trophy. I think if you see him continue to progress the way that we watched late in the year last year, and he builds that rapport with Nick Harbor and Maceo Bennett and whoever else is the breakout wide receiver, because they got like 5 freshmen, one of them is going to have a great season. If they can all take those next step forward, and that rapport is great through the passing attack, this could be one of the more explosive offenses in the SEC. The thing that I really appreciate is, if you know anything about Mike Shula, he has worked with this style of quarterback before. Now, I'm not saying Cam Newton is a good comparison. It's a dumb comparison. Every single time that we hear about Cam Newton, every single time that we hear about what he was able to accomplish, people want to bring up Lenore Sellers. I think that's disrespectful to Lenore Sellers. I think more importantly, that is completely disrespectful to Cam Newton. But Mike Shula worked with Cam Newton. He also worked with a great tight end in Greg Olsen and a solid run game with 2 different guys in D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart. I see similarities in that offense of what we watched in Carolina in 2015. You have a tight end in Michael Smith that I think is going to have a breakout year. Finally, we're going to watch as that 4-star lives up to expectations. He's 6'6". He's a mismatch nightmare. The early report is that he's more comfortable in the system. So I think he's going to have a big time role inside the red zone. Rasul Faison, to me, is the most underappreciated player in the SEC right now, because not many people know that in the Mountain West, for an under disgustingly terrible Utah State team, guy had over 1,100 rushing yards and over 1,400 total yards. He's not coming to Columbia. And part of the reason why this team was so good last year is they had a 1-2 punch with Rocket Sanders in the backfield. So I really like this team. The defense is going to take a step back. They are. You can't lose talents like Nicky Manwari and Debo Williams and Tonka Hemingway and TJ Sanders and the SEC Defensive Player of the Year and Kyle Kennard and say, we're going to be elite. We're going to be the best defense possible. You can't say that. You'd be foolish to go ahead and set your expectations that high. But let me ask you, what would you rather have? A team that ends up playing consistently defensively, top 40 in pass defense, top 40 in pressure rate, top 40 in tackles for losses. Dylan Stewart takes that next step forward, and he ends up having 15 sacks next year. And he's a finalist for the Benardic Award. Would you rather see that and your offense drastically improve to where you're not trusting your defense to have to get that next third down stop to give your offense another opportunity? Would you rather see that than see your defense just be elite and your offense still be stale? Because to me, that's what I'm looking at right now. I'm trading away giving up 7 points to add 7 points to my offense. Great question, though. OU Revenge Tour. We've already talked about this, but I want to bring this up just because you asked it and you're watching. So, number one, thank you for watching. Question, what are your thoughts on Giovanni Gibson from OU? He's getting a lot of spring season media hype. I've already said Giovanni Gibson, in my opinion, is one of the more underrated wide receivers in college football, and I cannot wait to watch what he does with John Mateer. Last season, 1,200 receiving yards out at Arkansas Pine Bluff, 8 games of 100 receiving yard performances. So he has proven that he can be an X factor, a number one, and a difference maker on the outside. We all have seen the clip of him and John Mateer connecting out in practice so far. I believe that that is something that you can see. And then you throw this in OU Revenge Tour with Deion Burks. Now, Deion Burks was the guy that I said, buy your stock in last season. I believe that he was going to be one of the biggest difference makers and a stud from the second that he touched down in Norman. And you know what? He really was. But then he got hurt. And unfortunately, when injuries occur, when it starts to stockpile on up, it begins to wonder, what is their overall trajectory going to be? I haven't sold my stock on Deion Burks. I still believe that the guy that I watched put up numbers in West Lafayette, Indiana, he could still be that dude. So now I got 2 guys working with the quarterback and John Mateer that had over 4,000 total yards of offense last season. And now I know that they've worked in Ben Arbuckle's system. I'd be pretty excited. In fact, I would be almost exclusively excited about what this team is going to be moving forward. Tommy B writes, it feels like more people continue to see Texas as the next great team in the SEC. And it's getting a bit disrespectful seeing everyone say the Horns could surpass Georgia as the it team. Do you agree? I completely agree. That is very disrespectful that people are saying that Texas can surpass Georgia as the next it team in the SEC. Here's the problem. They're not wrong. You guys realize that Texas has been one of the more bountiful teams when it comes to their fan base. And I'm not talking about the fans that absolutely don the burnt orange and white and say, I'm a Texas fan. And then you find out they went to Texas Arlington or that they have no correlation to the university. It's just like Alabama fans. I'm talking about the boosters. The boosters have made it clear that they're willing to put their money where their mouth is. So much so that Tom Herman, 2 years after leading Texas to a win over Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, and Sam Ehlinger said, we're back, and he was wrong. They fired him because he didn't get along with the boosters. He didn't want to do things the way the boosters want it done. And so they said, we're going to hit reset. And this has been a team that has been trying to get back to the pedigree of dominance for over a decade. I mean, I remember when I was growing up in the state and I was watching Texas in the Big 12 just terrorize teams. And they were great players with Derek Johnson and Cedric Benson. And Mac Brown was the reason why we were talking about Texas as the next it team. They could be the first dynasty. And we watched as they had some great years. 2009 Alabama game. Colt McCoy doesn't get hurt. I truly do believe, as well as Davis said multiple times on this show, we don't know what the future of Alabama football is because that was the start of the dynasty. Colt McCoy is not hurt. They win that football game. Now they have the right pieces in play. And they got the head coach in Steve Sarkisian. I understand Sark has not, quote unquote, won the big game, meaning that he hasn't won a college football playoff appearance in the semifinals. But who's to say that he can't do it? If Ryan Day can do it, if eventually James Franklin can win a playoff game against a ranked team, because yes, they were all ranked, why can't Steve Sarkisian win a national title? They just finished number 1 in the recruiting rankings. They just finished with a top-tier recruiting. I mean, they just finished with another top-tier season. They feel like that their overall demeanor is still there. And more importantly, they're producing NFL talent. They're going to have a first-round offensive lineman for the first time since 2013 with Kelvin Banks. And he's the start. Everyone else starting next year, you're going to watch as they get drafted in the first round. And then that's the future of Texas, because the Horns Collective, what we have seen from the Pancake Bond Company, from all of the NIL, is bountiful out in Austin. And the Longhorns want to be players. They don't want to sit by idly. They knew what they were signing up for when they joined the SEC. They were totally content with the two. But it is disrespectful to say that they will surpass Kirby Smart in Georgia, because I have doubted Georgia. I've doubted Georgia before and how they've gone about things. Kirby Smart recently came out and said, we're not hiring a GM. So many coaches are beyond excited to see what the future looks like, where it's one fewer thing off of their plate. They don't have to worry about with all the recruiting and the NIL class. We got a GM. He's going to handle the budget. He's going to tell us where to look. And Kirby's like, no, bullshit. I want to do it. I want to go out there and I want to scout the talent. I want to know what I'm investing in. To me, that just says that you're built differently. And I don't think by any means whatsoever people are going to realize pretty quickly that Kirby's going to lay down just dormant. He sees what's happening in Texas. They get a brand new state-of-the-art workout facility. Guess what he's going to do? Go right to those boosters and go, hey, we got to match what Texas is doing, because you want to continue to see the results. You want to be that it team. You want to now be the face of the SEC the way that Nick was and Alabama was for decades. You better go ahead and answer. And I can tell you what, the Georgia fans are going to say, sure, Kirby, how much? Because if we finally have tasted after 40 years of not winning the big game, we don't want to go back to that. It was a year to where people said it was a lost season, that they lost to Oklahoma. I mean, that they lost to Ole Miss on the road, that they lost to that they lost to Notre Dame. People have said that. The Alabama game, first year, Ryan Williams, they come back all the way. And it's like, it's an Alabama problem. They don't like that. And you think that for 1 second, they're going to sit by idly and just allow Texas to take over as the face of the SEC. Far from it. Far from it in my entire life. I can tell you what, you can doubt Kirby all you want. You can doubt what people are saying about what the program is doing, but they're going to be fine. They'll still finish with the top 3 recruiting class. Wasn't number 1 in the SEC, but you know what? I can promise you that lit a fire underneath Kirby's ass, knowing that Texas, their first season in the conference, has that number 1 logo attached to their name. They responded. Look at the transfer portal players that they brought in. They made sure they were not going to rely just heavily on the freshmen and what they currently had to be able to go ahead and respond. No, they went out and they added in Noah Thomas, a 6'6" demon inside the red zone, and Zachariah Branch, who can do a little bit of everything, but just wasn't used properly with Lincoln Riley. Like a lot of players that weren't used properly with Lincoln Riley. I think that Georgia's still going to be the team to beat. I don't know if we can say that every single year they're going to win at every recruit, because Texas has the money and they can absolutely make the same offer. That's why they got Justice Terry. That's why one kid is not wearing the red and black and wearing the burnt orange and white. But there will be times where you absolutely see players that look at both Texas and Oklahoma and they say, I want to go play for Kirby Smart. And I still believe that pedigree, those expectations, that will be something that continuously leads this team to victory. If you have any more questions, real quickly, we got one more. Get them in now, so that way we can go ahead and end the show and you guys can get back to watching Missouri and Mississippi State. Also, like the video, hit the ring notification. We got over 500 people watching right now on multiple platforms, so it takes 2 seconds. I really would appreciate it. It gets our content up, and it gets more viewership on our race to 20,000 subs as we continue to try to prove that we are the best entity in the SEC. I've been rambling for 44 minutes, and I've barely missed a beat. So why not just show some appreciation? Why not also just go ahead and leave your comments down below? What would you like to see in next week's Overtime Drive episode? Monday, we will be back. Last question from Mark D. What are your 5 dream games to attend in 2025 for the SEC Unfiltered Tour if you were in control? That's pretty easy for me. In fact, I actually can name this right off the top of my head. There's a lot of games that I want to throw in, but what I did was I tried to make this as clear as possible, mention as many teams as I could. For starters, it's LSU versus Clemson week 1 in Death Valley. This is QB1 and QB2 for me going up against each other. I believe K. Klubnik can absolutely be the best quarterback in college football. He's got veteran wide receiver play. He's already mastered the ins and outs of what we have watched from Garrett Riley's offense. I think they're still going to have a good run game. I think the defense is going to play better. I also know that LSU has the weaponry that can go toe-to-toe with Clemson's defense. And if not now, when? LSU has not won a week 1 opener since 2019. Do you know what happened that year? Well, a guy by the name of Joe Burrow broke NCAA records, and they punched their ticket to a national championship. And Ed Orgeron, much like Gene Chizik, can say he's a national title winner. He can say that for the rest of his life, no, regardless of what he does. That's something he could do. I believe in Brian Kelly. I believe in this LSU team. I also believe that Clemson, this is a team that people need to actually pay attention to. And I mean, even in the SEC, South Carolina, Palmetto Bowl, week 14, absolutely they have to pay attention to him. Because if I really like what Clemson has done, they're an actual force that I think could make a run in the right system to a college football playoff national championship appearance. And it all starts with week 1. I think one of these two teams really sets the tone for their season in 2025, depending on what happens out in Death Valley. And they also get to claim who is the actual Death Valley moving forward. Game number 2, Ole Miss versus Georgia in Sanford, week 8. Remember what we watched from Austin Simmons. One drive. You watch as Jackson Dart goes out. He comes on in, builds that rapport with Caden Lee, and he leads them down the field, and they get a touchdown. And then Dart comes back in, and they proceed to get a double-digit victory on their home turf. Well, Kirby Smart does not lose to teams like Ole Miss often. But you also are going to see what Austin Simmons truly is at this point. We'll have a pretty good inclination about what this offense is going to be for Ole Miss. Got some young wide receivers like Caleb Cunningham. They also got some veterans in there like Trey Wallace coming on in from Penn State. You're going to get a fully healthy year of Logan Diggs, hopefully. The offensive line still feels pretty good. Luke Haas, I think, is going to be a breakout at tight end. But Georgia's still Georgia. And this is between the hedges. This is in Sanford. This is in Athens. They are not going to play idly and just sit by and watch as Lane Kiffin gets another surefire victory, especially one on the road. Georgia rarely loses at home to begin with. And what if this is the game that ends up having massive playoff implications? I'm not ready to give up on Ole Miss. Their schedule is extremely manageable. They absolutely could be one of the more surprise teams that goes on this run, loses one game, and has punched their ticket to the college football playoff. It could happen. I think Texas and Florida in week 6 is another game that I really am interested in. Both these teams are going to be coming off of a bye. Both these teams have quarterbacks that people are, in my opinion, slightly overrating. I believe DJ Lagway and Arch Manning are top 10 passers, but I also have them on the back end of the top 10. I don't have either ranked number 1. I don't have either ranked inside the top 5. But I think at this point in the year, both of them are going to be coming off of really consistent starts. They're each going to have one of those trap games underneath their belt. For Florida, it's Miami. For Texas, it's Ohio State. What do they look like? And what if this is the moment where everything starts to click for the quarterback? And then we look back as they're in New York City and they're shaking the hands of Travis Hunter and Troy Smith and Tim Tebow as they're hoisting up the Heisman Trophy. And you realize that was the game where it all came together. I just want to go to the Swamp. I've never been there before either. I just know what the atmosphere is like, the way that the sound reverberates off the walls. I won't back down in the fourth quarter. That's just got to go ahead and light a fire underneath your ass, especially when Florida's good. And I believe that Florida, their record may not show it, but they're going to be good next year. They're going to be a lot more consistent than what we saw in 2024. South Carolina versus Texas A&M at Kyle Field in week 12. I actually will be going to this game. I don't care if Chris Phillips wants to go to any other place. I will be going to Kyle Field to watch as the Fighting War Chickens take on the Aggies. This will be a moment where, again, it's revenge on the mind of Mike Elko and company. They had the lead going into the third quarter. Things went south, and this was the moment where the North Stars kind of proved to the world, I'm back. I'm him. I am exactly the type of player that everyone envisioned. That 6'3" kid from Florence, South Carolina. Watch out for me. Well, what if A&M, who's been spending money like no one's business, continues to build that rapport on the offense? And the offense ends up being better than advertised. Le'Veon Moss is going to be fully healthy at this point. You're going to have Ruben Owens and Amari Daniels for this team. It's 4 starting offensive linemen returning, which is wonders for most teams, including Texas A&M. Casey Concepcion and Mario Craver, what are they going to look like? Micah Hudson, is he going to be playing this year? Who's to say? But if he builds that rapport, that's a 3 wide receiver set that could be challenging for anybody. But what if you watch as the same thing goes on for South Carolina? And their defense with new guys like Brandon Cisse comes on in, Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy from Texas A&M. They're all hitting their stride underneath Clayton White. And now we're talking about this is a top 15 matchup. And the winner of this they stay alive one more week in the hunt for the college football playoff. And the loser, enjoy the Citrus Bowl, enjoy the Texas Bowl. Hopefully you're ready for December in Memphis, because that's what you can expect moving forward after that. And the last one, Oklahoma versus Tennessee and Neyland, week 10. I think there's something magical about Neyland Stadium, especially on a Saturday night and the wind is chilling. Like right when that weather is changing, that's November in Knoxville, where you get the wind chill maybe a little bit underneath the 40 degrees. Not good enough for snow, but certainly good enough to where that will affect the game. John Mateer at this point has either established himself as the next great quarterback in the SEC, or he's already proven that, hey, no matter what, if I come back next year, I'm going to have a ton of changes and likely a new head coach. But people are kind of forgetting about Nico Iamaleava. I believe that Nico's going to take that next step forward. I am a lot higher than most on what Nico is going to be, because I look at how we finished the season, and I understand definitely some overthrows, definitely some double coverages that you want to have back. The game against Ohio State was always going to be a massacre, whether you like it or not. But I still believe, hey, Hendon Hooker took a step forward in year 2 under the Josh Heupel system, and they didn't have an elite run game, but they did have a solid run game. They also had some wide receivers that continued to build their stride, like a Jalen Hyatt. Remember what Jalen Hyatt did in 2021? I don't, but I remember what he did in 2022. He won the Biletnikoff, and he was a reason why we were talking about Tennessee being that playoff-bound team, that team that absolutely could make it to Atlanta, hoist up a conference championship, and Josh Heupel was a top 10 coach. Well, I feel that way about Mike Matthews going into next season. What if it's Amari Jefferson that has a breakout year? What if it's a guy like Braylon Staley? What if it's having back Chris Brazzell and he takes that step forward? Miles Kitselman, Ethan Davis, the offensive line is better, and they still have a stable run game. And then we see Josh Heupel once again pull the wool over his alma mater's eyes, this time in front of the hometown crowd, and they're getting closer to feeling like they're going to a national championship or a college football playoff appearance. I'm just saying, those are some games that I'm really interested in. Those are the ones that I would absolutely love to go to, because I love Rocky Top. I love Neyland Stadium. I love the atmosphere on a game day in Knoxville, Tennessee. I also want to get Cookout because I haven't had it in a while. To me, those are some places that I think that are my dream destination. Seeing those games up close and in person, that would just go ahead and make my day. All right. I went way longer than I was going to go. I thought it was going to be like a 20-minute show. We went 52 minutes. So if you're still watching, number one, thank you. Number two, like the video, hit the ring notification. That way you don't miss a single episode of the Overtime Drive. Dave will be back next Monday. We're going to be breaking down quarterbacks. In fact, starting next week, one of our segments is going to be, we are going to talk about every single position in the SEC, what they look like in spring practice, what they're going to look like going into 2025, who we're a lot higher on, who we're a lot lower on. And we're going to start with quarterbacks. So make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. That way you know what I think about your quarterbacks, because a lot of them I'm actually a lot higher on than most people. I think that the SEC has 8 of the top 15 quarterbacks in college football this year. So who are those 8? We're going to break it all down. Like the video, hit the ring notification, make sure that you are subscribed. And real quickly, make sure that you go visit FANDUEL.com/SECU. Join today and get started with $150 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. That way, you can go ahead and play more parlays, more lines, and put more wagers down so you have a better shot of winning not just a national championship for your school, but also a lot of money when your team wins a national championship. I will be back on Sunday for Sunday Fun Day, 10:30 Central, 11:30 Eastern. Make sure you are subscribed. But for all of us here at SEC Unfiltered, have a good night. Enjoy college basketball. Hopefully your team wins. And if you've already been eliminated, well, have a drink on me. Peace.